October 14th, 1944. A black Mercedes-Benz pulls up to a villa outside Ulm, Germany. Two generals step out. Inside, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated commander, faces an impossible choice: stand trial for treason or swallow poison and spare his family. Within an hour, he is dead. The Nazi regime will call it a cerebral embolism. The truth is darker and more complex. This is the story of a military genius who became a propaganda icon, a field marshal who may have conspired against Hitler, and a man whose legacy remains fiercely debated 80 years later. Was Rommel a principled soldier trapped in an evil regime, or a willing servant of Nazi aggression? The answer lies buried in the sand dunes of North Africa, the Atlantic Wall bunkers, and the secrets of July 1944. Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel was born in 1891 in Heidenheim, southern Germany. The son of a schoolmaster, destined for neither aristocracy nor high command. But the Great War would change everything. As a young lieutenant in the Royal Württemberg Mountain Battalion, Rommel distinguished himself not through lineage, but through audacity. In October 1917, during the Battle of Caporetto on the Italian front, Rommel led a small detachment through mountain passes to capture Mount Matajur. In 50 hours of nearly continuous combat, his unit took 9,000 Italian prisoners, with minimal casualties. For this feat, he was awarded Germany's highest decoration, the Pour le Mérite. Rommel had discovered his gift: the lightning strike, the flanking maneuver, the element of surprise. Between the wars, Rommel served as a training officer and published a tactical manual, Infantry Attacks, which became required reading in military academies. He was not a Nazi by ideology. His diaries show little interest in party doctrine. But when Adolf Hitler came to power, Rommel saw opportunity. He commanded Hitler's security detachment and caught the Führer's eye. By 1940, Rommel was a rising star. May 1940, France. Rommel commanded the 7th Panzer Division in the Wehrmacht's lightning invasion through the Ardennes. His division moved so fast, often 60 miles in a single day, that German High Command lost track of his position. Allied forces were even more confused. The 7th Panzer earned a nickname: the Ghost Division. Rommel led from the front, often riding in the lead tank, communicating by radio, improvising as terrain and resistance shifted. His superior, General Hermann Hoth, later complained that Rommel ignored orders and took reckless risks. But the results spoke for themselves. By June, France had fallen, and Rommel was a national hero. Hitler saw in Rommel not just a tactician, but a symbol, a photogenic general who embodied the image of the clean Wehrmacht, untainted by SS atrocities. Goebbels' propaganda machine made Rommel a star. Newsreels showed him in goggles and leather, the dashing commander. The legend was being built. February 1941. Rommel arrived in North Africa to command the newly formed Deutsches Afrika Korps. Italy's invasion of Egypt had collapsed. Mussolini needed German help. Rommel was ordered to hold the line. Instead, he attacked. With just 2 divisions, Rommel struck eastward across Libya, catching the British off guard. He retook Benghazi, pushed to the Egyptian border, and besieged Tobruk. British commanders scrambled to respond. Rommel's tactics were unorthodox. He used captured trucks to raise dust clouds and create the illusion of larger forces. He moved at night to avoid air reconnaissance. He personally led reconnaissance missions deep into enemy territory. The British press began calling him the Desert Fox, a grudging term of respect for an enemy who seemed to materialize out of sandstorms. One British intelligence report noted, Rommel is a tactician of the greatest ability, particularly in mobile operations. Even Winston Churchill, speaking in the House of Commons, praised Rommel's daring and skill, though he was quickly rebuked for complimenting an enemy. For 18 months, Rommel's Afrika Korps fought a back-and-forth campaign across the western desert. He captured Tobruk in June 1942, a humiliating defeat for Britain, and was promoted to field marshal. At 49, he was the youngest in the Wehrmacht. Hitler presented him with a field marshal's baton and declared him a genius. The Desert Fox was at his peak, but Rommel's supply line stretched across 1,000 miles of desert and a Mediterranean Sea controlled by British air and naval power. Fuel, ammunition, and food arrived sporadically. Rommel pleaded with Berlin for reinforcements. They never came in sufficient numbers. Meanwhile, Britain was preparing a counterattack under a new commander, Bernard Montgomery. October 23, 1942. El Alamein, Egypt. Montgomery launched Operation Lightfoot with overwhelming force, nearly 1,000 tanks, more than 1,000 artillery guns, and total air superiority. Rommel's Afrika Korps had 300 tanks, many broken down, and fuel for just 3 days of combat. The outcome was foreordained. Rommel had been in Germany on sick leave when the battle began. He flew back immediately, but there was little he could do. The German and Italian lines held for 12 days of brutal fighting. But by November 4th, the front collapsed. Rommel ordered a retreat, directly defying Hitler's victory or death command. It was the right decision militarily, but it marked a turning point. Rommel had begun to doubt the Führer's judgment. By late 1942, the Allies had regained strategic initiative in North Africa. The Americans landed in Morocco and Algeria. Montgomery pursued from the east. Rommel fought a brilliant delaying action. The retreat across Libya and Tunisia showcased his defensive genius. But the strategic situation was hopeless. By May 1943, Axis forces in North Africa surrendered. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers marched into captivity. The Desert Fox had been caged. Rommel himself had been evacuated before the final collapse, recalled to Germany ostensibly for health reasons, though many suspected Hitler wanted to preserve his propaganda value. Rommel would never fight in Africa again. But the war's next phase would bring him to an even more crucial theater: the defense of occupied France. November 1943. Rommel was appointed Inspector General of the Western Defenses, Hitler's acknowledgement that an Allied invasion of France was coming. The question was, where and how to stop it? Rommel toured the Atlantic Wall, the chain of fortifications from Norway to Spain, and found it shockingly inadequate. Pillboxes with no ammunition, minefields that existed only on paper, concrete bunkers built in the wrong places. Rommel set to work with characteristic energy. He ordered millions of mines laid on the beaches, underwater obstacles installed at the tide line, and anti-glider stakes, Rommel's asparagus, driven into fields where Allied paratroopers might land. He believed the invasion had to be defeated on the beaches in the first hours. "The war will be won or lost on the beaches," he wrote. "We'll have only one chance to stop the enemy, and that's while he's in the water, struggling to get ashore." But this strategy put him in direct conflict with Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the overall commander in the West. Von Rundstedt favored the traditional German doctrine: hold the panzer divisions inland, wait to see where the main invasion comes, then counterattack with concentrated armor. Rommel argued this was suicide in the age of Allied air supremacy. "If we don't throw them back into the sea within 24 hours, he warned, we'll never throw them back at all." The debate raged through the winter and spring of 1944. Hitler, characteristically, split the difference. Some panzer divisions went to Rommel's control near the coast. Others remained in reserve under von Rundstedt. Still others required Hitler's personal authorization to move. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and would prove catastrophic when the invasion finally came. By spring 1944, Rommel had begun to harbor darker thoughts. Germany was losing the war. That much was obvious to any clear-eyed observer. The Eastern Front was collapsing. Allied bombers pulverized German cities nightly. Rommel wrote to his wife Lucy, "The situation is bad everywhere. It sometimes seems to me as if we're headed for a dreadful end." For the first time, Rommel was thinking not just about battles, but about Germany's future. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Rommel was in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday when the invasion began. He had predicted the Allies would strike in good weather. The forecast called for storms, so he'd taken a brief leave. It was a miscalculation that haunted him. By the time he returned to France on June 7th, the Allies had secured 5 beachheads. Rommel's worst fears were realized. His beach defenses had been breached. The panzer divisions that might have counterattacked sat paralyzed. Some required Hitler's authorization to move. And the Führer was asleep until noon, his staff too terrified to wake him. Allied fighter bombers ruled the skies. Any German column that moved by day was obliterated from the air. Von Rundstedt's inland reserve strategy was in ruins. But Rommel's beach defense plan had also failed. The truth was simple. Germany no longer had the resources to stop the Allied juggernaut. For 6 weeks, Rommel directed the defense of Normandy from his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon. He fought with skill and ferocity, but he was commanding a losing battle. Allied naval guns shelled German positions with impunity. American and British divisions poured ashore faster than the Wehrmacht could contain them. German casualties mounted catastrophically. And all the while, the plotters in Berlin were closing in. By early July, Rommel reached a shattering conclusion. The war was militarily unwinnable. On July 15th, he sent a final report to Hitler, stating bluntly, "The unequal struggle is nearing its end." He urged negotiations with the Western Allies. It was, in essence, a political manifesto, and it amounted to treason. 2 days later, Rommel's war ended not with an Allied bullet, but with friendly fire from above. July 17, 1944. Late afternoon. Rommel was returning from the front near Livarot when his staff car was spotted by Allied fighter aircraft. The pilots, their exact identity remains debated to this day, opened fire. Cannon shells ripped through the vehicle. The driver was killed instantly. The car careened off the road and crashed into a tree. Rommel was thrown from the vehicle, his skull fractured, his face lacerated, his left eye damaged. He was unconscious when his aides pulled him from the wreckage. For days, doctors weren't sure if he would survive. He was evacuated to a hospital in Bernay, then to another in Versailles, and finally to his home in Herrlingen, southern Germany, to convalesce. The strafing was recorded in Allied combat logs, though pilot attribution varies in the sources. Some credit a Canadian Spitfire pilot, others an RAF Typhoon squadron. What is beyond dispute is that Rommel, Germany's most famous field commander, was out of action at the most critical moment of the war. And in his absence, a conspiracy was reaching its climax. July 20th, 1944. At Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a briefcase bomb beneath the conference table and left the room. At 12:42 p.m., the bomb exploded. 4 men died. Hitler survived, shielded by the heavy oak table. The coup collapsed within hours. By nightfall, Stauffenberg was dead, executed by firing squad in Berlin. The Gestapo began rounding up suspected conspirators. Rommel was in a coma when the bomb went off, but his name was in the files. Under interrogation, several conspirators mentioned Rommel as a potential leader of post-Hitler Germany. General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, the military governor of France and a key plotter, had met with Rommel multiple times in the spring of 1944. Documents seized by the Gestapo suggested meetings in May between Rommel and resistance figures, including discussions about how Germany might negotiate with the Western Allies if Hitler were removed. Recent archival research, papers discovered and brought to light since around 2018, complicates the narrative of Rommel's political position. Historians now know that Rommel met with civilian resistance contacts, including discussions facilitated by his chief of staff, Hans Speidel. The question is how much Rommel knew and how deeply he was involved. Rommel's defenders argue he supported removing Hitler through arrest, not assassination. A soldier's coup, not a bomb plot. His detractors note that any plan to remove Hitler was, by definition, treasonous. The truth, as always, is murky. What is certain is that by September 1944, the Gestapo had decided Rommel was guilty. October 7, 1944. Rommel, still recovering from his injuries, was at his home in Herrlingen with his wife Lucy and their 15-year-old son, Manfred. He had been warned by friends that his name had come up in interrogations. He told his family he expected a visit. On October 14th, the black Mercedes arrived. Two generals stepped out, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maisel, both emissaries from Hitler. They carried documents implicating Rommel in the July 20th conspiracy. They presented him with a choice: face trial before the People's Court, a show trial ending in execution with his family stripped of property and pensions, or take poison, die quietly, and be given a state funeral with full honors. His family would be protected. He had 10 minutes to decide. Rommel spoke briefly with his wife. He told his son, "In a quarter of an hour, I'll be dead." He climbed into the car with Burgdorf and Maisel. They drove to a secluded wooded area. Rommel swallowed the cyanide capsule. 15 minutes later, he was dead. The Nazi regime announced that Field Marshal Rommel had succumbed to injuries from the July 17th strafing, a cerebral embolism brought on by his wounds. Hitler declared a day of national mourning. On October 18th, Rommel was given a state funeral in Ulm. Von Rundstedt delivered the eulogy, calling Rommel one of the greatest commanders of all time. It was a lie built on lies. Rommel's death was murder dressed as mercy, propaganda masking purge. In the years after the war, Rommel's reputation underwent a remarkable resurrection. The Allies, particularly the British, cultivated the image of Rommel as the good German, a professional soldier who fought honorably, who had nothing to do with the Holocaust, who may have resisted Hitler at the end. Churchill wrote of him, "He deserves our respect because, although a loyal German soldier, he came to hate Hitler and all his works." Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff and a conspirator who survived the war, published Invasion, 1944, portraying Rommel as a secret anti-Nazi who had opposed Hitler from within. B.H. Liddell Hart, the British military historian, edited The Rommel Papers, a collection of Rommel's wartime letters and diaries that presented him in a sympathetic light. Hollywood made him the subject of a 1951 film, The Desert Fox, starring James Mason, depicting Rommel as a tragic hero. But this rehabilitation was selective. Rommel's Afrika Korps, while not implicated in Holocaust crimes, fought to extend Nazi control. Rommel served Hitler loyally until it became clear Germany would lose. His moral awakening, such as it was, came late. too late for the millions already dead. And scholars continue to debate how much he truly knew about the regime's atrocities, and whether his opposition to Hitler was principled or pragmatic. The Desert Fox remains an enigma, a man celebrated for his military skill, yet inextricably tied to history's darkest chapter. Today, historians are still arguing over Rommel. Was he complicit in Nazi crimes, or simply a soldier following orders? Did he genuinely oppose Hitler, or was he merely trying to save Germany from total destruction? The evidence is mixed. Rommel never joined the Nazi Party. He protested illegal orders on at least one occasion, refusing to shoot Jewish prisoners in France in 1940. But he also accepted promotions and honors from Hitler, and he fought to extend a regime that perpetrated genocide. On the question of the July 20th plot, recent scholarship based on archival documents suggests Rommel knew more than he admitted. He met with resistance figures. He discussed post-Hitler scenarios. He sent defeatist reports to Berlin urging negotiations. Whether that amounts to active conspiracy or passive awareness remains contested. Some historians argue Rommel was a reluctant resistor, pushed toward opposition by Germany's impending collapse. Others say he was hedging his bets, trying to position himself for a post-war future. What is undeniable is Rommel's military brilliance. His campaigns in North Africa are still studied in military academies worldwide. His understanding of mobile warfare, combined arms tactics, and battlefield leadership was exceptional. But brilliance in war does not grant moral absolution. Erwin Rommel died at 52, his legacy contested, his final months shrouded in ambiguity. The Desert Fox became a symbol of German militarism, of lost causes, of complicated men in terrible times. Nearly 80 years later, we are still trying to untangle the truth from the legend.